At around 9 a.m. on July 18, 2009, Kathy Lin arrived at the home of her brother, 45-year-old Norman Min Lin, and found that he and his entire family had been bludgeoned to death. Kathy was with her husband at the time, a former surgeon and failed restaurant owner by the name of Robert Lian Bin Zi. They'd had dinner with the Lin family just last night and were utterly shocked when they found their loved ones brutally slain in an inexplicable attack. Norman's wife, 44-year-old Lily Yun Lin, and her sister, 39-year-old Irene Yun Bin Yin, were found dead next to the head of the household. And to make matters even more gruesome, Norman and Lily's children, 12-year-old Henry and 9-year-old Terry, had also been slain in a similarly vicious manner. The only survivor was 15-year-old Brenda, who was away on a school trip at the time. What brought about the deaths of this seemingly normal family? That's what we'll be unpacking today. Whenever familicide occurs, the perpetrator is almost always someone that was close to the family. As we'll soon reveal, the police's suspicions would eventually land on Robert C. But before we get into that, we must understand who the Lins were and why they became the targets of such unimaginable violence. Both Norman and Lily were born in mainland China, but they decided to move to Australia sometime during the early 1990s for university. While attending the University of Sydney, they met each other by chance and immediately felt a connection. Perhaps it was the immigrant experience they shared, or maybe their connection went beyond their mutual Chinese background. Either way, Norman and Lily quickly fell in love, and based on how the timeline unfolded, it's possible that they got married not long after graduating. Brenda was born in 1994, and the Lins moved to the suburb of North Epping to settle down. Henry was born 3 years later, and in the year 2000, the family was complete after the birth of Terry. They became widely respected members of the community and started a local news publication that everyone in the area lined up to read. Over time, this news business would end up raking in $1 million a year. This immense wealth meant that the family was able to live extremely comfortably, and by all accounts, they were a close-knit family. Norman and Lily also showed a deep desire to care for their family members, allowing Lily's sister Irene to live with them permanently. Back in China, other relatives of theirs decided to make the move to the land down under as well. In 2002, Norman's sister Lily managed to migrate to Australia as well, settling in Melbourne instead of Sydney. According to reports, her husband was a celebrated ENT surgeon in China, but despite his years of experience, he wasn't able to get a similar job in this strange new land. Looking at his brother-in-law's success, Z decided to start a restaurant, hoping that he'd become a successful business owner as well. Unfortunately, Z didn't have the same knack for business ownership. By 2005, the restaurant business had folded, and the husband and wife traveled to Sydney to be closer to their successful relatives. Later reports indicate that Z was resentful of Norman's success. He might have been a big deal in China, but in Australia, he felt like any other immigrant. The failure of his business only rubbed salt into his wounds and cemented the decline in status he'd experienced since he'd migrated. However, this wasn't the only factor at play. Unknown to anyone else, Z had perverse sexual inclinations that he managed to keep hidden. This fragile grip on morality wouldn't last for long, though. It would burst out in a violent frenzy that would lead to a vicious act that would shock the entire North Epping community. On July 17th, Lily and her husband joined the Lin family for dinner. This was a frequent occurrence, with the Lins often opening their home up to their relatives to help them feel included. At some point during the night, Lily and Z headed back home. The next morning at around 9 a.m., a crowd of people had gathered around the entrance to the Lins' news business. The family was famed for their punctuality, always opening the shop up well in advance to make sure that everyone got a newspaper on their way to work. But something was different this time around. The minutes ticked by, and the Lins were nowhere to be seen. Once Kathy found out about this, she and her husband rushed to the Lin residence and found the front door unlocked. This is when they entered and found the mutilated corpse of Norman, Lily, and Irene. The two boys were found in their bedroom, completely covered in blood. As for Brenda, she was visiting New Caledonia on a school-sponsored trip. Was it mere coincidence that she wasn't around when the slayings occurred? From the very start, there was evidence to suggest that this was actually by design. For one thing, Brenda's room had been untouched. The door was closed, and her belongings were completely undisturbed, which is odd considering that the attacker went up to Henry and Terry's room to finish them off. This suggested that the perpetrator didn't want to hurt Brenda. In fact, he likely knew that she'd be out of town, and possibly timed the incident to take advantage of her absence. Could this mean that the killer had a soft spot for Brenda? As it turned out, the culprit definitely did harbor feelings for the girl, but these feelings were of a twisted and perverse nature. As soon as Kathy found the bodies, she dialed 000, the emergency services number for Australia, and frantically tried to explain what had happened. Kathy seemed completely distraught during this call, so much so that she couldn't even tell the first responder what location she was in. She also spoke in Cantonese at certain points, which later reports revealed were directed at C. She was asking him to stay, begging him in fact, but C said that he had to go, and Lily and Kathy's parents from Maryland, a nearby Sydney suburb. Over in New Caledonia, Brenda had no idea what had happened back home. Her parents had told her to stay in touch, but she later said that she was too excited by her first foreign trip to check in. This is understandable behavior given that she was just 15 years old at the time. Even so, she was going to find out one way or another. A few hours after the news broke out, Brenda saw a link to an article about the homicides shared by her friend on Facebook. She couldn't believe what she was reading. She'd said goodbye to her family just a few days ago, and she struggled to reconcile the fact that it was their final parting. When a member of the community called school principal Susan Bridge, she immediately booked Brenda on the next flight home. The sole survivor of the Lin family arrived in Sydney and was embraced by her sobbing Aunt Kathy. This was when it finally hit her. Her parents, little brothers, and Aunt Irene were all truly gone. All she could do now was wait for investigators to look for a culprit. She stayed with her aunt and uncle as she awaited answers, but while police searched for clues, Brenda would go through a terrifying ordeal at the hands of a relative. But we'll get into that later. First, we need to see how the investigation unfolded. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. In May of 2010, the New South Wales Crime Commission asked Kathy to come in for an interview, saying that they'd uncovered new evidence. They revealed the presence of the bloody footprints, a detail that hadn't been shared up until this point, and mentioned that they came from a specific shoe by the Essex brand that had been purchased sometime in 2005. The purpose behind this reveal was simple. Kathy would likely tell her husband about the new evidence, and police could monitor his response through hidden surveillance cameras they'd installed. When they watched the grainy footage, they saw Z cutting up a box with the Essex branding on it, and later flushing it down the toilet. The box had once held 9.5 size sneakers, which matched the description of the shoes worn by the perp. It bears mentioning that Kathy was with him while he cut up the box. Did she not question her husband's strange behavior? Could she have been in on it? There's further evidence that suggests that she either knew of her husband's dark side, or she was completely oblivious to it. By May of 2011, it had been nearly 2 years since Brenda's family had lost their lives. She'd been in the care, or rather clutches, of Z and Kathy the whole time. And based on her accounts, she was put through an unimaginable amount of torment during this time. They'd moved into the North Epping home once inhabited by the Lin family, so it seemed like Z's desire to live Norman's life was finally fulfilled. However, It all came crashing down on the 5th of May. Police arrived at the North Epping residence and arrested Z, who was remanded into custody at Long Beach Correctional Center. While there, he allegedly confessed to another inmate that his in-laws, Kathy's parents, were always disappointed in him and compared him to Norman. This appears to have pushed him past the breaking point. After facing multiple delays, Z's trial finally began on March 17, 2014. Prosecutor Mark Tedeschi outlined 3 possible motives for Z slaying the family. Firstly, there was his desire for financial gain. Secondly, there was the matter of his pride. And thirdly, evidence showed that he was sexually attracted to his underage niece. The inmate he confessed to took to the stand, stating that Z told him he'd sedated Kathy on the night of the slayings. Z was also known to wear Asics sneakers, and he owned a massage device suspiciously similar to a hammer that prosecutors said was the homicide weapon. What's more, Z's acquaintances said that he usually slept in on Saturdays, yet on the morning of July 18th, he was up cleaning his garage. An inspection of said garage revealed a small bloody smudge that contained DNA from at least 4 of the victims, further implicating Z in the crime. Bit by bit, the prosecution laid out a case that seemed to confirm that Z was the culprit. Unfortunately, the evidence was considered circumstantial, and the trial was aborted. A second trial began that August, but once again failed to lead to a verdict when the judge fell ill. Prosecutors made a third attempt February of 2015, but the jurors weren't able to agree on a verdict. Eventually, Z was able to make a plea for bail. Jier's lawyer told the court the family will hand in their passports and says Jier will be monitored closely by police. But the Crown says no amount of money is sufficient, given Jier has every reason to flee Australia. The bail application came just seconds after the same magistrate ruled there was enough evidence for Jier to go to trial. He's accused of blood. It was December by this point, and despite the flight risk he posed, the judge decided to grant Z bail for Christmas. Kathy was reportedly overjoyed, saying that she loved her husband and implying she believed in his innocence. But it wasn't meant to last. On January 12, 2017, a jury finally convicted Z of the homicides. They held him guilty on all counts, and since Australia abolished the death penalty in 1985, Z received the maximum legal penalty of 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Brenda would later come out to speak her truth, expressing her deep regret at the way she left things with her father.
Thank you for being an amazing father. Oh, I didn't get to tell him I loved him. And that was the last time I talked to you. I know. I just wish I told him that he's an amazing person, and thank you for doing everything for us. And I never told him that I was grateful. Never told him I loved him. And I'll never be able to either.
With the culprit finally in jail, she might finally be able to move on, though the fact that she has to do so without her family makes it unimaginably difficult. Kathy has maintained a low profile since the conviction. It's unknown if she still believes her husband's innocence, but it's likely that she no longer has a relationship with her niece. The victims of these crimes include not just the people that died, but also the ones that loved them. The ones that have to learn how to live with the traumatic memory of their passing. So what do you think of this case? Did Z get the sentence he deserved, or did he get off easy because of Australia's abolition of the death penalty? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.